Chapter 41, Snow Lotus Essence. Translator, Atlas Studios. Editor, Atlas Studios. Pieces of ice fell to the ground. Cough, cough! Fang Yun pressed on his chest as he coughed out blood clots from his heart and lungs. These blood clots had solidified into small pieces, letting out intense coldness. Fang Yuan's expression was unusual. His face looked purple. He had suffered a huge injury. The goo refinement had failed. The giant iceberg exploded, and Fang Yuan had to forcibly endure the backlash. Immortal Guman as before? Fang Yuan immediately activated his immortal goo, restoring himself to his previous state. The purple tint on his face disappeared, and his injuries were almost all gone. But there was still large amounts of frost energy solidifying inside his body, making him feel uncomfortable. The frost energy was not a result of the goo refinement failure, but had accumulated in Fang Yuan's body throughout the refinement process. Because the time duration was long, man as before was not able to produce perfect results. Speaking of which, I have mainly been relying on man as before as my healing method. This rank 6 immortal goo is extremely useful and is the core to many killer moves in the Shadow Sect inheritances. Given some time, after I train and get proficient in these killer moves, my healing ability will definitely rise sharply. Fang Yuan started pondering when suddenly a flash of inspiration hit him. Wait, since there is man as before, why is there no goo as before? A goo worm to heal goo worms. This was possible. If there is an immortal goo like goo as before, can't I use it as the core to design an immortal killer move to help me refine goo? If there is truly such a killer move, then I could have used it just before to immediately recover the damage and return back to the final step of the goo refinement. Fang Yuan's eyes shone as he began to inspect the storage of Shadow Sect inheritances in his mind. The true inheritance contents of Shadow Sect was as vast as a sea. After Fang Yuan looked through them, he found that this idea had already been envisioned by predecessors. And there were many who thought of this. Most of them were Refinement Path Goo Immortals, and there were also those of Time Path. There were many inheritances where predecessors had recorded their thoughts and results regarding goo as before. However, they were all incomplete immortal goo recipes, and not one was deduced completely. It was very difficult to realize this concept. As far as most goo immortals were concerned, man as before had a limited range of use, rank 6. Man as before had a very weak effect on rank 7 goo immortals, and often the activation would fail. Rank 7 man as before also did not have outstanding effects on most rank 7 goo immortals. Unless the target was a Time Path goo immortal with a lot of Time Path Dao marks, then they would not conflict with man as before, and also be able to amplify its ability. Since man as before was like this, goo as before was even more troubling. To goo immortals, using goo as before to restore mortal goo had small significance, because goo immortals did not lack mortal goo. The matter of mortal goo was only a problem of quantity for them. Naturally, lifespan goo was an exception. But using goo as before to restore immortal goo was even more difficult than restoring goo immortals, because every immortal goo was a fragment of the great Tao in their respective paths. There was a strong conflict between immortal goo of different paths. Immortal goo could coordinate with each other, but using their effect on another immortal goo was a completely different concept. Unless they had dominance in rank, for instance, using rank 7 goo as before to restore rank 6 goo had some likelihood, but using it on rank 7 would definitely fail. The concept of goo as before was extremely enticing, but it was too difficult to create in reality. There were many goo immortals who had such inspirations, and there was not a lack of Refinement Path and Time Path great grandmasters among them. Unfortunately, none of their efforts succeeded. Goo as before was not a viable concept, but Fang Yuan had other ways around it. For instance, some Refinement Path immortal formations. These immortal formations had short-term effects of backtracking through time. Goo immortals could activate these immortal formations to restore any mistakes. In Shadow Sect's inheritances, there were over 10 such immortal goo formations. But each of them had some disadvantages. Some had enormous demand on immortal essence, Some had limited numbers of times they could backtrack through time, and some were only limited to refining rank 6 immortal gunpowder. Among these immortal goo formations, the greatest one was Immortal Goo House Regret Pool, one of the 3 legendary pools of the world. Unfortunately, be it Regret Pool or those immortal goo formations, I only have the inheritances but lack the suitable immortal goo. Fang Yuan sighed, feeling troubled at having the knowledge, but not having materials to put it to use. Actually, in his current situation, there were too many options laid in front of him. When ordinary people came across immortal opportunities and inherited some predecessors' inheritance, they would jump in joy. Their cultivation journey would also brighten up, and their prospects would widen. Fang Yuan's shadow sect inheritances were gathered by spectral soul demon venerable in his life, and even continued for 100,000 years after his death. It could be said, Fang Yuan had obtained a sea of inheritances. He had countless choices in his cultivation journey. And among these choices, the most attractive were Soul Path, Time Path, Earth Path, and Space Path. Because they were inheritances of venerables, even a small portion could create chaos and cause Goo immortals over the 5 regions to engage in mortal combat. With these in his hands, needless to say, Fang Yuan's future prospects were limitless. But the things that could truly provide the greatest help to Fang Yuan were not these new choices. Because although these choices had immense prospects and were extremely tempting, the amount of time, energy, and resources they consumed were astronomical. The one thing that could greatly help Fang Yuan currently was Wisdom Goo. The light of wisdom could provide an incomparable help to cultivation. Fang Yuan had already tasted the benefits of this, and had an extremely deep impression of it. And to obtain wisdom, Goo's acknowledgement once again, he had to use his original rank, 6 strength path immortal zombie body. Fang Yuan already had the method to get rid of the soul path trap in the immortal zombie body. He was only lacking the core immortal goo, cleanse soul. It all simmered down to refining cleanse soul immortal goo. Regretfully, they had already tried to refine cleanse soul immortal goo over 10 times, but all the attempts failed. Although the ice refinement method suits me really well, I have not focused on ice path before. Moreover, these final few steps are truly difficult. Fang Yuan sighed. That's true. Sixth hair went up to Fang Yuan's side and sighed as he looked at the ground filled with ice pieces. The success rate of refining an immortal goo was too low. It was a pit with no end in sight. Only the current Fang Yuan had such accumulation and resolution to continue the attempts to refine cleanse soul immortal goo. Currently, Fang Yuan had one big concern, whether someone had already refined cleanse soul immortal goo. Immortal goo were unique. If that was the case, he would not be able to succeed in the refinement no matter what. However, this could be investigated to some degree. If the immortal goo refinement had no mistakes during the whole process, but failed inexplicably at the moment of success, it would imply someone had already refined cleanse soul immortal goo. But cleanse soul immortal goo's recipe was a secret, and the range of its circulation was quite small. Adding on that it had not been long since it had been destroyed, Fang Yuan's chances were still high. Maybe we can modify the last few steps. We can use Snow Lotus essence to replace those ice path immortal materials, Sixth Hair said. Modifying the immortal goo recipe? Fang Yuan mumbled, slightly nodding his head. The final few steps were truly too difficult. After replacing the immortal materials, these few steps could be broken down. Although it would lengthen the procedures and time of the entire refinement process, the difficulty would decrease by a lot. Then let's try modifying the immortal goo recipe, Fang Yuan considered for a moment before deciding. Modifying an immortal goo recipe could not be done casually and required continuous attempts. It contained huge risks and would waste many resources. But Snow Lotus essence, this rank 7 immortal material, is quite difficult to obtain and is rarely seen in Treasure Yellow Heaven. Fang Yuan was slightly worried. Sixth Hair smiled. That's of no concern. Snowman tribes produce a lot of this immortal material. Don't forget that we have already joined Northern Plains Variant Human Alliance. I have asked around and found that the Snowman tribe below the Northern Icy Plain has plenty of Snow Lotus essence. Let's purchase them then. Fang Yan put his mind at ease. Although he had few immortal essence stones currently, he had countless Shadow Sect inheritances. Just taking out some of these could lead to terrifying chaos and carnage. Thus, Fang Yuan was simply not worried that the Snowman tribe would be unmoved. I must obtain the Snow Lotus essence. A sharp light flashed past Fang Yuan's eyes. He had to refine cleanse soul immortal goo as fast as possible. For this, Fang Yuan would not hesitate to pay any cost.